Hey everybody, welcome to the Chapter 8, Section 2 video, and we're going to be talking about the Holy Roman Empire and the Church. So the Holy Roman Empire is definitely one of the more confusing topics to learn about in medieval Europe. It was made up of a number of different territories, and it was very rarely a politically united empire like the old Roman Empire. Still, it was an important aspect of European history in the Middle Ages, so it's important that we learn about it. Let's first talk about what the Holy Roman Empire actually was. It was generally a region throughout Central and Southern Europe. Okay, we mostly think of Germany when we think of the Holy Roman Empire. So if we look at the map, the majority of this area through here, Lorraine would kind of be a little bit most. Okay, this is more or less Germany today. You got some areas that would be Austria, Czech Republic, and so forth. And then it even went down into these regions into Italy, like Lombardy, Tuscany, and so forth. Now, the term Holy Roman Empire traces its roots back to Charlemagne. We learned back in the beginning of Chapter 7 that Charlemagne built a pretty big empire in Europe and was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope as a reward for helping the Pope defeat some enemies. We also learned, though, that Charlemagne's empire broke apart not too long after he died. The German part of his empire dissolved into a bunch of separate states. Eventually, these states were brought under control by Otto I. Otto was a leader of the region of Saxony. Okay, so Saxony, you can see here, is the biggest of the regions in the northern part of the Holy Roman Empire. And like Charlemagne, he gave help to the Pope. Otto helped the Pope defeat rebellious Roman nobles, just like Charlemagne did. As a reward, Otto was crowned emperor, and his successors took the title Holy Roman Emperors. Holy because they were crowned by the Pope, and Roman because they saw themselves as heirs to the empires of ancient Rome. Now, this new empire was very decentralized. Holy Roman emperors claimed control over a large area of land, but in order to maintain control, they had to rely on their vassals. Nobles and church officials who were given huge land and title by the emperors controlled huge amounts of territory. So you notice how on this map, the empire is broken up into all these different states. The nobles that ran these states, they were technically vassals to the king, but they had a tremendous amount of independence from the king. All right, so power was very much spread out, and it was always a challenge for the emperors to control their vassals. Some emperors also ran into significant interference from the church. Let's look at these feuds between Pope and Emperor, because they at times could get very nasty and violent. The most significant conflict was between Emperor Henry IV and Pope Gregory VII. Now, Gregory wanted to make the church completely independent of kings and emperors, so he banned lay investiture. Now, lay investiture, as we all know by now, was when a ruler who was a lay person, meaning not a member of the clergy, would appoint bishops or other high-ranking religious officials. This was, in a way, an investment of power for the king or emperor, hence the whole part of investiture. He was giving someone a very high rank in society in exchange for their loyalty. So now these new bishops would be loyal to the emperor rather than the pope, and Gregory wasn't having any of that. So he bans it. Now, Henry IV, emperor at that time, angrily opposed Gregory's order. He refused to listen to the ban and continued appointing bishops. In response to this, Gregory excommunicated Henry. Henry was now threatened with rebellions amongst his people, and he was forced to beg the Pope for forgiveness. This is Henry right here, okay, the guy that looks like a beggar in robes. That was the actually Holy Roman Emperor who was forced to go before Pope Gregory and beg for forgiveness. Now, Henry definitely did not forgive the Pope for this excommunication, though, because the following year, after Henry was able to get back on the throne, Henry led an army to Rome and forced Gregory to flee into exile. And that's what you see in this medieval transcript here. Okay, this is Gregory, and he's being driven from his throne by these knights. And then they also show Gregory later on, a couple of years later, on his deathbed. So what we're seeing here is a very different dynamic between popes and leaders than what we're used to today. These popes engaged in secular political disputes that often turned violent. Even after the investiture issue was settled, new problems arose, such as the struggle for Italy. Now, first off, a note about Italy is that Italy is not a united nation. It hasn't been since the fall of the Roman Empire, and it wasn't going to become united until the late 1800s. Around the year 1000, so the beginning of these high or late Middle Ages, you can see how Italy is broken up into a number of different states. You've got the Kingdom of Lombardy, you've got Verona up here, you got Tuscany, you got your papal states, these yellow areas that are controlled by the Pope. You've got Sicily down here. So there's little to no political unity going on in Italy at this time. German emperors, right? So the German emperors would be just north of here in the Holy Roman Empire. They believed that since they held the title Roman Emperor, they should control Italy as well. And the most ambitious of these German emperors was Frederick Barbarossa. He dreamed of building an empire over all of Central Europe. And he spent years fighting to control these northern Italian cities, especially this one here, Venice. All right, Venice was the richest of the cities, even though it controlled not a large amount of land. Because of the trade routes that came in here, it made it a very, very wealthy port city. And these cities, as I just said, like Venice, many of them wealthy from trade, they formed an alliance called the Lombard League. And this was an alliance between these northern cities. All right, it was called the Lombard League because of Lombardy up here. They formed an alliance with the Pope. So basically, you've got the entire northern part of Italy going against poor Frederick Barbarossa. And they were able to defeat Barbarossa's forces. Now, Barbarossa and his descendants spent years fighting down in Italy, and this had a pretty big impact back in Germany. It further decentralized the Holy Roman Empire. With the emperors down fighting in Italy, like Barbarossa, his grandson, they were obsessed with kind of conquering all these Italian city-states. The German nobles had total control over their lands, and they grew more independent. Now, the Holy Roman Empire survived, but it became a patchwork of feudal states. Let me just erase this, and then we'll take a look at the map. So this is what the Holy Roman Empire looked like by the year 1400, the end of these medieval periods. And I'm not even going to attempt to go into it for you. It's so confusing. But you can see by all the different colors and all the different labelings that this is very, very far from being a united political entity. All right, and Germany wouldn't be united until the late 1800s. Now, one thing that became apparent by this time, though, is that the church had reached the height of its power. Popes had shown that they could control emperors, like with Henry IV, and defeat them in battle, like with Barbarossa. An example of this increased power is Pope Innocent III. He took power in 1198 and claimed papal supremacy over all Christian monarchs. He said he was between God and man, lower than God, but higher than any man, including kings, and he will be judged by no one other than God. He also excommunicated kings of both England and France and placed entire kingdoms under interdict. So he definitely wasn't afraid to flex his authority. Also, during this time, the church fought against anything it considered to be opposition. It violently put down heretical groups that were considered threats. There was a group in southern France that rejected important Christian teachings, and the Pope called for a crusade against them. Here you see in this picture on the left, Innocent excommunicating a group, and here you see on the right, Christian knights going to war and battle against these people, and in some cases massacring entire towns and populations. So they weren't truly rebellions, but this opposition to the church's authority were violently crushed. It shows for the first time that the church is using its power to do away with any group that disagreed with them. Keep this in mind when we learn about other movements that want to break away from the church. All right, so that will wrap things up for section 2.